Hello everyone, welcome to our first interpersonal communication theory. I'm going to actually try to go in the order these theories are presented in your book. So what we've got in our first, I'm hoping I can get through two of these in one, we'll see, in one screencast. We'll see, we've got 4 total theories to cover. 3 of them are in our text, 1 of them is not. I'm going to include an outside theory. So let's dive in. In chapter 2, you had your first theory introduced, and I skipped it on purpose in the screencasts for chapter 2 because I wanted to save it for our focus on theories of interpersonal communication. So theories are, the word theory gets tossed around kind of like, well, it's just a theory. Well, actually, theories are backed by usually a minimum of 1 decade, usually more, of really solid research, tons of data gathering, and usually multimodal data gathering. And what I mean by that is especially in the realm of communication, if we're going to call something a theory, it's got to have qualitative and quantitative. It's got to have observation. It's got to have interview stuff. There's so much that goes into something achieving theory status, okay? When something achieves theory status, that means so far this is a really good explanation, okay? So when we're talking about theories of interpersonal communication, we are talking about very powerful ways of looking at and understanding communicative behavior among human beings. Okay, so to start, let's start in chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2 introduced social penetration theory. So the theorists behind this are Taylor and Altman. Your book has a little citation about that. This is a very simple but solid theory. Okay, and that's the beauty and the sign of a good theory is when it's simple but very explanatory. Okay, so social penetration theory deals with how relational closeness develops. Okay, so to come here, when dealing with social penetration theory, we're talking about how do people get close. And I believe I said this in the chapter 2, chapter 2 sets of screencast. We were talking about self-disclosure. Self-disclosure is the currency of intimacy. If you want intimacy, the thing that must be exchanged is self-disclosure, okay? And I'm talking about genuine intimacy. Yes, people have bonds, and people can be connected without disclosure, but it's not intimacy. It's not relational closeness. You can feel bonded to someone for life, okay? I have a lot of students in my courses who have been in combat, who have been to war. And they speak of, if you are ever under fire with someone, you're bonded with them. And I've never experienced that, so I trust it. I trust them. And so I had a student ask me one time, so does that mean we didn't self-disclose, that happened and we were close? And I was like, well, I would argue that you were bonded, and that's a really strong bond, because experiences do bond people together, but that you were not relationally close. Now, can that lead to relational closeness? Yes, but usually it would mean it leads to disclosure, okay? So what we're dealing with here is not just the bond, okay? We're dealing with relational closeness, and the way you get close to people is you self-disclose, all right? So social penetration theory says that it's all about the revealing of the self to others, okay? And that's how relational closeness develops. And their idea, the theorist idea anyways, behind social penetration theory is that revealing the self to others involves peeling back or penetrating layers. And so that's why it's called penetration theory, okay? Social penetration theory. And so there are 3 layers to the self. And so that's one of the reasons why this was in chapter 2. The self has layers, according to the theorists, all right? You've got your outermost layers, your intermediate layers, and your central layers, all right? And this is, in the book, they have the picture from Shrek where he's explaining to Donkey that ogres have layers and it's like an onion and onions have layers. It's actually pretty solid. It's pretty solid theory. What those writers wrote and what Shrek is explaining there. So I don't know if they did that on purpose or not. But by the way, if you want to be scared, I don't know how old everybody is. If you want to be scared, if you're even remotely my age, look up how long Shrek, the first one, has been out. It'll blow your mind. Anyways, that was for free. So you've got your outermost peripheral, intermediate, and central layers. And so we use the onion metaphor, okay? And this is a really good way of understanding the way that self-disclosure works. And so, and we talked a little bit about the Johari window, and your book goes into the ins and outs of self-disclosure. That stuff is all very important and linked into this theory. So you've got the onion, and on the outside you've got the stuff that you're more willing to share, the easier stuff, okay? The stuff a little further in is the intermediate. The stuff in the very middle is the center, okay? Now, just like an onion, all right, the self's outer layers are easier to shed off and show people, okay? I will tell you my age, my major, and my hometown. That's, if you're ever in a first day of class in college, you're probably going to have to give some sort of introduction, okay? But then as you cut into an onion, the layers more toward the middle are harder to cut. And that is exactly how ourselves are when it comes to self-disclosure. The deeper in we get, the more we resist that penetration, the more we resist that disclosure and that sharing. And so in the intermediate layers, you've got musical taste. I'll tell you my musical taste on the periphery. This is one of the things, by the way, about the theory is that just because one person has something on the outside doesn't mean that that thing might not be further in for you. We all have our own onion, and we all have our stuff that's wherever it is, okay? But then in the middle part, the central layers, you've got the really deep stuff, okay? So you've got social penetration theory that says relational closeness develops via self-disclosure. And good self-disclosure is going to breed relational closeness, okay? And how do you know you've got good self-disclosure? Well, you're going to have breadth and depth. I'll come back to this slide in just a second. Breadth and depth. So if hang on one second, I'm about to sneeze. Apparently, I don't know if it's allergies or a cold, but I'm just going to have to sneeze 1,000 times during these screencasts this morning. So, breadth and depth, folks. So it's one thing for you and I to meet on a train. And we start to talk a little bit, and over the course of a 2-hour train ride, we talk about our lives a little bit, okay? And so maybe because we did that, we went sort of deep, and we went sort of deep relatively quickly, okay? That doesn't mean that I know you. It means I know things about you. That's very different, okay? Now, if I know you, should I know things about you? Yes, absolutely, okay? But this idea of breadth and depth, and I'll get to the definitions in just a second. I will go to that slide. The idea is that for us to really be known and for us to know people, to have that relational closeness, it's going to look something like this, okay? I am going to know this much of your onion, okay? Or maybe even more, okay? I mean, this could even come in further, see? And it's the breadth and the depth. I know a giant chunk about you, all right? And please don't make fun of how bad I am with this mouse, all right? So this idea of breadth and depth says, yeah, you and I could tell you where I'm from, I could tell you about my upbringing, but you don't know me, all right? That's over time with self-disclosure, those things can happen. So when we do get to breadth and depth, breadth, okay, is the number of different aspects revealed, and the depth is how deeply we go, all right? And so sometimes, and we're always sort of guarded with exactly how much information we're going to share when and with whom. And some people are out with it really, really quickly. Other people are not. You've probably met someone who in the first 5 minutes you were like, wow, I did not need to know that about you. Where other people you've known for years and you're like, you know what? I don't actually know this thing about them. And so it really just is going to be dependent upon your upbringing, your culture, what you've been through, what you like, your personality is a part of it. What do you want to disclose? What do you not? All that kind of stuff, okay? And so intimacy is the feeling of closeness and union that exists between us and our partners. And self-disclosure is the currency of intimacy. Self-disclosure is how we get there. Okay? So, if you choose an artifact, a pop culture artifact, where you've got two people and they're starting to get to know each other, and they're in the beginning stages of this self-disclosure process, you might want to analyze it with social penetration theory. Or maybe in your pop culture artifact, it's two people who are interested in each other until one of them finds out the thing about this other one. Because what that means is they were starting to self-disclose, they were a little bit interested, and then all of a sudden that thing says, no, I'm not going to do that. That actually links to our next theory, though, okay? So many of these theories could be used in conjunction with each other, and sometimes that's a wise choice, is to pick one main theory, but then also talk about uncertainty while you're talking about self-disclosure, because essentially self-disclosure and uncertainty reduction go together, okay? So that is our next theory. Our next theory is uncertainty reduction theory. So you've got Charles Berger, who first put this forward, and then later, a later collaborator was, I can't think of the first name now, but Calabrese is the other big researcher here. And so with uncertainty reduction theory, guess what you're doing? you're reducing uncertainty. But there's some really interesting things and some very powerful things behind why we reduce uncertainty and what the result of that is. Okay, so I've got a little bit of text here we're going to hit. So remember, social penetration theory is we self-disclose to create intimacy. Okay, and we have onions and breadth and depth and stuff like that. Uncertainty reduction theory says that our primary compulsion during an initial interaction is to reduce uncertainty. Okay, so yeah, that's one of the things self-disclosure is about, okay? This is talking about the very basic idea of lowering uncertainty, okay? So, we want to reduce uncertainty about our communication partners by gathering enough information about them, and this is a big deal, okay, about this, that their communication becomes predictable and explainable. So, it's less about the self-disclosure and creating of intimacy, this theory is, okay, than it is about me gathering information about you and you gathering information about me so that the other's communication becomes predictable and explainable. Does that make sense? So yes, if you and I are beginning to interact, there's going to be self-disclosure, probably on the outer layers of the onion. That's social penetration theory. Uncertainty reduction says that you and I, in that moment, are really trying to gather enough information about each other so that the communication becomes predictable and explainable. Okay? So that's why initially this theory was put forward, simply to explain an initial interaction between two people who may or may not ever meet again. But it has since been pulled a little bit further because it really is important that we reduce our uncertainty over long periods of time about the people who are in our lives. So even you and I, as a student and a professor in our relationship, there might not be much self-disclosure going on between the two of us. There's some. I'm reading your work. You're watching my screencast. You know I use myself as an example. There's some self-disclosure going on there, but really there's a lot of uncertainty reduction going on there, especially on your part with me. You're trying to reduce uncertainty about how the class works and grades and stuff like that. So this is a really powerful idea. And so then you carry this further. When we reduce uncertainty, we tend to perceive people as attractive and likable. The more that we are able to predict communication, the more that we are able to explain it, okay, we're able to perceive them as attractive, likable, talk further, and consider forming relationships with them. Be it a friendship, be it a romantic relationship, be it a work relationship. Uncertainty reduction theory is not limited to romantic relationships. And in fact, neither is social penetration theory. Okay? We self-disclose with the people around us depending on what the context calls for. Okay? So we have this need to reduce uncertainty. Okay? And there are ways we go about it. And that'll be the first thing we do in part 2. I'll see you there.